we're going to talk about what you should be expecting when it comes to fat loss, because it's so easy to fall off track. It's so easy to fall off the wagon and lose that motivation, because I truly believe it comes down to false expectations and not false, but unrealistic expectations. Because when it comes to fat loss, everybody seems to think that, because this is based on conversations with people on TikTok, current clients, everybody seems to get discouraged the second that they gain a little bit of weight, which is actually part of the process. Everybody seems to think that, oh, I'm just going to lose weight every single week, and it's going to be this nice, pretty, diagonal downward line on the scale, and it's going to be awesome. There's never going to be any problems as long as I do everything right? Wrong. Even if you do everything 100% correct, you will have fluctuations. But I'm not going to get ahead of schedule here. I gotta like points that we gotta hit in order so we fully grasp this, and so I don't miss anything. Most importantly, let's start with the fact that a lot of people just don't weigh in correctly. A lot of people are very inconsistent on this. When it comes to your weigh-ins, you want them to be first thing in the morning. You want them to be on an empty bladder, empty bowels if possible, or empty colon. I don't know. Go poo. And you want to do it at the same time every single morning, if possible. Now, if you have a job that's like all over the place, I wouldn't recommend doing daily weigh-ins anyway. But aim for the same exact time, same exact scale, because if you're using different scales, every scale is different. There's no like universal way to make all of them line up the exact same way. It just doesn't happen. So if you're doing one scale at the gym, one scale at home, and then getting frustrated, that's why. Stick to the one scale. Pick whichever one it is, but I suggest one at home, because if you're doing it at the gym before your workout or after your workout, you're now hydrated, or after the workout, you're now slightly dehydrated if you didn't drink enough, and the weight's just going to be all over the place. It's not reliable, and that's what we're chasing, is reliability, consistency, so it's a valid weigh-in. So if anybody ever took like statistics or anything like that, that's where that comes from. It's like, or for that matter, if you like learned about the scientific method, things have to be consistent. They have to be reliable so that you can compare. Because if you're comparing two different things, it's like apples and oranges. It's not one bigger apple, one smaller apple, if that makes any sense. But anyway, I think I hammered that point home. Just weigh in correctly. Make sure that you do it the same way every single time. And then when it comes to frequency, you want to make sure that you're not doing like one time this week, 5 times next week, and then 3 times the next week, because again, there is zero consistency in that. When it comes to weighing in, I tell all of my clients, it's all or nothing. We're either doing daily or we're going to be doing like monthly or once per phase, which is like I do 6-week phases. So we would do one weigh in the first day and then one weigh in 6 weeks later. Because the problem with that is if you're doing like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then the next week you're doing Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, these are different days of the week, different schedules, and there's no consistency, and you're going to be getting a bunch of random numbers. And a lot of people, a lot of times miss those days where they have the lower weigh-ins. And sometimes they only end up weighing in on days where they happen to be a little bit heavier. So they think they're gaining weight when in reality, you're missing those days where it drops back down. So if you're going to miss those days, there's zero point in doing that. So if you're doing it once every 6 weeks, ideally, you're going to be down by that time just by law of averages. If you're doing everything correctly and for some reason you hold off on weighing in every single day, but your weight is still trending downward, if you were to weigh in, then you should be less at the very end. And pretty much every single time, that's what happens. Or if it doesn't happen, then it's usually a glaring reason, like, oh, I went out like 5 weekends in a row, I hit every happy hour, stuff like that. Or like sleep was hurting, or it could be a number of different things. But more times than not, you know what the problem is. And then once this is all situated, once you have this consistency, then we're in a place where we can really kind of start putting faith in these weigh-ins. Now, When you do them, say every single day, for example, there will be peaks and valleys. There will be times where you gain weight, and that's totally normal. And there's going to be times when you lose weight, which is awesome, but don't tie yourself emotionally to the outcome, because what we're doing here now is creating the logic. We want to take emotion out of it, because emotion does nothing good for us, especially on a weight loss journey. And we're going to flip it into logical. Because again, if you're expecting that downward trend, you're going from point A to point B. Point A is your starting point. Point B is like a week after that point, and you're expecting a straight line down. It ain't happening. Because what happens is your body goes through fluctuations. Now, this could be for a number of different reasons. For one, if you cut out certain things like, say, carbohydrates. When people go keto, they get all excited because like, oh, I lost all this weight so fast. And it's like, yes, you did lose weight, but it wasn't fat, or most of it wasn't fat. It was water and it was carbohydrates, because when you ingest carbohydrates, they then turn into glycogen, and glycogen is stored in your muscles, it's stored in your liver, and it sits there as a fuel source ready to go. So when you don't have that fuel source, that's kind of like if you were to weigh your car on an empty tank of gas. It's going to be lighter than if you weigh your car with a full tank of gas. That's just simple math right there, simple concept. And that's why I hate when like keto companies will like promote saying you'll lose this much in a week. And it's like, great. That's not fat though. That's just tricking people. And you'll see these people are continually frustrated because they're like, this same 3 to 5 pounds, I keep burning it off, putting it back on, burning it off, putting it back on, when it's like, that was never fat. That was never fat. It was always fluid. It was always carbohydrates. And those companies are lying to you and taking advantage of that, like honeymoon phase is what we call it. Like in business, like you have, when you're doing fat loss, for example, that honeymoon phase is like that first month. And when you're losing because you're literally just starving yourself of carbohydrates, yes, it's going to show that you're going to have less weight than if you kept them in. But if you've listened to previous episodes, we know cutting carbs does absolutely nothing as far as benefits go. And when it comes to the overall picture and like best practice, it actually isn't as effective as including carbohydrates, because you get shittier workouts, your body doesn't respond as well, and all of these keto people are just drinking the Kool-Aid. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. Fluctuations, carbs are one of them. Another thing when it comes to fluctuations is like, one, do you have to go number one? Do you have to pee? If you have a full bladder is heavier than an empty bladder. So for that reason, that's why I tell people go pee before you weigh in. Second is number two, do you have to poo? A full bowel is heavier than an empty bowel or colon or whatever. And then when it comes to the ladies, is it that time of the month? When it's that time of the month and the hormones are fluctuating, that can result in fluid retention. And that doesn't mean that you're just getting fatter. It just means that you're holding on to a little bit more water, because that's part of your body's process. That's what happens. Okay. Another thing to take into account is stress. So say, for example, you're going through like busy season for tax people, for accountants. Like if you're going through busy season and all of a sudden you're super duper stressed and you're heavier during that season and nothing else changes, like you're not going off the wagon, like you're not eating and drinking everything in sight, like you're pretty much sticking to the plan and you can't understand why you're heavier, that could be why. And or whatever your profession is. If you're going through a season where it's very stressful, like your companies are merging, or like maybe it's personal, maybe it's something with your family, like that, and you have the same situation where you just are heavier for some reason and you can't figure it out, that could be why. Stress, our bodies don't like stress. They just don't. And then last but not least is salt. Let's say you went to dinner the night before and you have a heavy weigh-in, even though you ate like the best thing on the menu, it still can result in a heavier weigh-in because of the salt, or even like the fats that they cook it in. Because when you ingest more salt allows you to hold on to more water in your body, which when we're talking like performance, like that's ideal. So let's say you like your kid or something is doing has a baseball game the next day, or like a tournament or lacrosse or whatever their sport is, that would be like the best position that they would want to be in, like eating something really good so they don't feel heavy the next day, but they're loaded up with salt, which is an electrolyte, like kind of like Gatorade. So doing that for performance, or like, let's say you have a 5K or an obstacle course race, that's what you want. But, or if you have a hard workout the next day, that's what you want. But if we're on a weight loss journey and we don't know to expect this, it can be pretty disheartening when you're 3 pounds up and you're like, what the hell? But that's why. So don't stress it. When you do have one of those like salt overloads, going for a couple extra walks, making sure that you hydrate a little bit more, and then getting those workouts in, it flushes right through you. And then more times than not, you're back to normal, or you have like a giant drop in weight. It has happened. I've seen it. But at the end of the day, the big point that I want to make in all of this is that the scale is not reliable. Like or I shouldn't say that. It's not that it's not reliable. It's like, it's a tool at the end of the day. It's a tool that can be good. It can be bad. It gets a lot of value when it really shouldn't, because I think when it comes to fat loss in particular, the thing that should hold the most weight, not trying to make puns here, but the thing that should hold the most weight when it comes to decision making, when it comes to emotions and all that other stuff, is inches, measurements, because that tells more of a story than the scale does. And when I'm talking measurements, I mean things like your chest, your hips, and your waist. Because sometimes when you go into the extremities, like I've had people that measure like the bicep and then the mid thigh, and sometimes they're working out so hard and it's the beginning of their fitness journey and they're putting on muscle, so they're gaining inches on the extremities, and they're like, am I getting fatter? And I'm like, no, that's muscle. That's muscle. Because when we looked at their hip to waist and chest, and those were all smaller, they're like, well, why did I lose here and gain here? And I'm like, well, that's a sign that you're gaining muscle and burning fat, because fat doesn't come off where we want it to more times than not. It really just, like, everybody points at that pouch on their belly and they're like, I just want to get rid of it here. And it's like, well, that's the last to go. So when you do these measurements, you start to see where your body prefers to let it go first. I know, like for me, for example, my face will lose the weight first, and then very shortly after that, it comes off my back, which a lot of people don't even think about. They're like, oh, like there is fat on your back. And then when you do that measurement, the circumference, like chest circumference, also measures like your back. Let's say you lost a bunch of fat in your upper back, that would show on that measurement. So get in the habit of using measurements more than the scale. And what I usually do with clients is like doing it once per phase. We do 6-week phases where they'll do the measurements on that first week and then again on that last week. And that's usually plenty of time to see a change. This is not something that you do day to day for the same exact reason. There are fluctuations. Like if you have a salty meal, your measurements are gonna be like bigger. If you got a crazy hard workout in the day before, your measurements are gonna be bigger. And that's also one of the things that can cause weight gain on the scale too, is if you push it super duper hard in the gym the day before, the inflammation and the healing process can make you hold on to more fluid, which has you being heavier on the scale. But again, back to the inches. Inches matter most. If you haven't already, before I guess you finish the podcast or whatever, if you're driving, when you get home, take some measurements. Do the chest. Okay, tuck the measurement under your armpits and then measure around the midline of your chest and see what that is. Then do one around your waist. So wherever your waistband on your pants goes, not talking about the high-waisted jeans, ladies, okay, whatever like that midpoint is on your waist, do that. And then once around the belly button or even just above the belly button for that. And then those 3 should serve you pretty well. Then you compare those every 6 weeks and you see if you're lower, if you're losing inches, then good, keep doing what you're doing. If you didn't lose any inches, then there's a possibility that you're gaining the muscle mass in that area too. So in that case, you kind of got to go by look, like as far as your butt. Like this is why it helps having multiple data points like weight, inches, and photos. Because if you look at the photo and you are the exact same weight, your inches haven't changed, but you look way more defined, that's probably a good sign that you are gaining muscle and losing fat, which is ideal. And yeah, those are going to serve you very, very well. I hope that all of this helps. I hope that I didn't go off on too many tangents and you're still with me. But yeah, that's plain and simple what to expect, how to set yourself up for success, and how to make better judgments going forward.